After considering the early part of the Genesis story, we turned our attention to the story of Job. And there we saw Job's righteousness and how Satan wanted Job's faith to be tested by these blessings being taken away. So, after some great trials, Job and his three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, they engaged in the first of 3 rounds of speeches. Remember that the friends have been accusing Job of sinning so as to cause God to punish him, while Job maintained his innocence and claimed he did not know why Job was opposing him. So as we continue thinking about this, let's move into the second round of speeches now between Job and his friends as we continue to walk through the Bible story. We see as the second round continues that the speeches seem to become more intense with each round. Again, the second round gives opportunity for all 3 friends to address Job and for Job to issue a reply to each. This will take us from Job 15 through 21. First up is Eliphaz, and Eliphaz accused Job of arguing with useless talk that comes from his sinfulness. Job 15, verses 2 through 6. Does a wise man answer with empty counsel, or fill himself with the hot east wind? Should he argue with useless talk, or with words that serve no good purpose? But you even undermine the fear of God and hinder meditation before him. Your iniquity teaches you what to say, and you choose the language of the crafty. Your own mouth condemns you, not I. Your own lips testify against you. And then Eliphaz concludes that, the wicked are the ones who experience the trouble. So then Bildad is next up, after Job's response, of course. But Bildad urged Job to stop all his foolish talk so they could talk some sense into him. Job chapter 18, verses 2 through 4. How long until you stop talking? Show some sense, and then we can talk. Why are we regarded as cattle, as stupid in your sight? You who tear yourself in anger, should the earth be abandoned on your account, or a rock be removed from its place? Look at, again, the strong language that we see as his friends are talking. And then Bildad paints pictures of how the wicked experience many terrible things. Against all the points are pointing to Job. You must have done something terrible. There must be sin in your life God's punishing you for. And then Zophar, he's troubled by what he hears from Job so as to speak. Job 20, verses 2 through 5. He says, "This is why my unsettling thoughts compel me to answer, because I am upset. I have heard a rebuke that insults me, and my understanding makes me reply. Don't you know that ever since antiquity, from the time a human was placed on earth, the joy of the wicked has been brief, and the happiness of the godless has lasted only a moment?" Verses 2 through 5. So in the first couple of verses, he's just troubled by what he hears from Job, and so he's got to speak. That's what's kind of prompting him to speak, he says. And he makes the case that the joy of the wicked is brief. Again, the implication in all of this is, Job, what have you done? This has to be something that you have done, that you have caused, that's resulted in all of this. Now, to each of these accusations, Job consistently maintained his innocence in the sense of committing sin that has resulted in his suffering. He's consistently saying it's not because something evil that I have done. that I'm suffering in these ways. Instead, he reached the conclusion and was stating often in his responses that he believed God had wronged him so as to treat Job as his enemy, and wanted to plead his case before God. Let's read Job 16, verses 11 through 14 as a sample. God hands me over to the unjust. He throws me to the wicked. I was at ease, but he shattered me. He seized me by the scruff of the neck and smashed me to pieces. He set me up as his target. His archers surround me. He pierces my kidneys without mercy and pours my bile on the ground. He breaks through my defenses. Again and again, he charges at me like a warrior. And then in chapter 19, verses 5 and 6, again as a sample of how God is saying, Job is saying that God is treating Job as his enemy, and he just wants to appeal his case, as one would do in court before others. Job 19, verses 5 and 6, if you really want to appear superior to me and would use my disgrace as evidence against me, that's what his friends have been doing, then understand that it is God who has wronged me and caught me in his net. You can see how Job is thinking about the trials that he's going through. And in addition, Job asked that if the conclusions of his friends are true, that the wicked don't prosper, then why do the wicked continue to live and prosper? Job 21, verses 7 through 9. Why do the wicked continue to live, growing old and becoming powerful? Their children are established while they are still alive, and their descendants before their eyes. Their homes are secure and free of fear. No rod from God strikes them. So he's got this question for his friends. But yet, even though these things had happened, Job concluded that his Redeemer lives. Job 19, verses 25 through 29. But I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the end he will stand on the dust. Even after my skin has been destroyed, yet I will see God in my flesh. I will see him in myself. My eyes will look at him, and not as a stranger. My heart longs within me. If you say, how will we pursue him, since the root of the problem lies with him? Then be afraid of the sword, because wrath brings punishment by the sword, so that you may know there is a judgment. So even after all this, Job knows that his Redeemer lives. And furthermore, as he goes through all these responses to his three friends, he identified that his friends are miserable comforters. Look at Job 16, verses 2 through 5. He says to Eliphaz here, I have heard many things like these. You are all miserable comforters. Is there no end to your empty words? What provokes you that you continue testifying? If you were in my place, I could also talk like you. I could string words together against you and shake my head at you. Instead, I would encourage you with my mouth, and the consolation from my lips would bring relief. And so he's telling his friends about just how they're approaching the situation just isn't right. You can also see he replies to each one in a similar fashion as this. See Job 19, verses 2 and 3, and Job 21, verse 34. So, then the second round of speeches between Job and his friends concludes, and then we get to the third round of speeches between Job and his friends. And unlike the prior two rounds, only Eliphaz and Bildad speak in this final round of speeches, with Job speaking after each, Job 22 through chapter 31. And note that Job also gave an extended speech after Bildad. But it's more of the same in this round, with the rhetoric becoming even more intense. Eliphaz concluded that Job's wickedness is abundant and his sin is endless. there in Job 22, verse 5, isn't your wickedness abundant? And aren't your iniquities endless? And he even makes specific accusations against Job and urging Job to come to terms with God so he can experience good and peace. Look at verse 21. Come to terms with God and be at peace. In this way, good will come to you. So again, look, Job, you've done all this evil. It must be your fault. If you'll come to terms with God, if you'll fix it, you'll own up to it, then you can have good again. And then Bildad's very brief speech focused on the dominion of and dread that comes from God. Job 25, verse 2. Dominion and dread belong to him, the one who establishes harmony in his heights. Then, in Job's speeches, as he responds to each one, and then again, his final speech there is even extended, his mouth was filled with arguments about why God should act differently than he had. He maintained his innocence and claimed that, again, God had done these things to him for no good reason. Let's read Job 23, verses 10 through 16. It says, "Yet he knows the way I have taken." This God, he knows the way I have taken. "When he has tested me, I will emerge as pure gold. My feet have followed in his tracks. I have kept to his way and not turned aside. I have not departed from the commands from his lips. I have treasured the words from his mouth more than my daily food. But he is unchangeable. Who can oppose him? He does what he desires. He will certainly accomplish what he has decreed for me, and he has many more things like these in mind. Therefore I am terrified in his presence when I consider this. I am afraid of him. God has made my heart faint. The Almighty has terrified me." Again, he thinks God has done this for no good reason, that if God will just test him, he'll see that he's innocent. You can also see chapter 27, verses 2 through 6. And what he wishes that God would do is that God would just weigh him with accurate scales. Job 31, verses 4 through 6. "Does he not see my ways and number all my steps? If I have walked in falsehood, or my foot has rushed to deceit, let God weigh me on accurate scales, and he will recognize my integrity." So you can just clearly see that, if he thinks if God uses accurate scales, he doesn't tip the scale against me, which he seems to think God has done, that he has attacked him unjustly. If he'll just weigh me accurately, he'll find out that I have been living with integrity, that I've been living to please him. I've been doing these things he desires, and he demonstrates that throughout these speeches as well. And so with these, the third round of speeches concludes. And now we're introduced to another individual by the name of Elihu. After the 3 rounds of speeches concluded, we're introduced to this man named Elihu, who has been present for the other speeches. Look at verse 1. "So these 3 men quit answering Job because he was righteous in his own eyes." So the other 3, they just stop answering. They just think Job's righteous in his own eyes, and evidently there's no getting through to him. There's no talking sense into Job. And so here's this other man, and he's been present for the speeches, but he's held his tongue because he was younger than the others. And he's angry at Job because Job had justified himself rather than God. And he's angry with the friends because they could not answer Job. Look at verses 2 through 5. Then Elihu, son of Barachel, the Buzite, from the family of Ram, became angry. He was angry at Job because he had justified himself rather than God. He was also angry at Job's 3 friends because they had failed to refute him and yet had condemned him. Now, Elihu had waited to speak to Job because they were all older than he. But when he saw that the 3 men could not answer Job, he became angry. And so here is Elihu, and he's angry on both sides. His friends have condemned Job, but they really couldn't answer him either. And Job, he's justifying himself before God, kind of thing. And Elihu wanted Job to prepare his case against him, against Elihu, rather than God. Since Elihu and Job, they were both men. Look at verses 5 through 7 of chapter 33. Refute me if you can. Prepare your case against me. Take your stand. I am just like you before God. I was also pinched off from a piece of clay. Fear of me should not terrify you. No pressure from me should weigh you down. So here's, prepare your case against me. We're equals here. We're both just clay. We're created. There's no fear of me that should terrify you. So prepare your case against me, he says. And he simply told Job he was wrong in the matter for trying to take God to court and make him give Job an answer for what had happened. Look in chapter 33, verses 8 through 13. Surely you have spoken in my hearing, and I have heard these very words. I am pure, without transgression. I am clean and have no iniquity. But he finds reasons to oppose me. He regards me as his enemy. He puts my feet in the stocks. He stands watch over all my paths. Right? He's summarizing kind of the gist of Job's arguments here, and summarizes them very well. But then he says in verse 12 and 13, but I tell you that you are wrong in this matter, since God is greater than man. Why do you take him to court for not answering anything a person asks? So, Job, this is your argument that you're making against God, and why isn't God answering me? And you just want to have your day in court against God kind of thing. And if he'll just hear me and weigh me on accurate scales, then he'll find that I'm innocent. And Elihu's reminding Job, look, you need to answer a man instead, and to ask these things, to make such statements. You don't need to be afraid. But God, you're wrong in this kind of mindset toward God. Right? God doesn't have to answer us and explain himself to us. He said that God has the right to do whatever he pleases and does not act wickedly. Chapter 34, verses 12 through 15. Indeed, it is true that God does not act wickedly, and the Almighty does not pervert justice. Who gave him authority over the earth? Who put him in charge of the entire world? If he put his mind to it and withdrew the spirit and breath he gave, every living thing would perish together and mankind would return to the dust. Look, that God does what's true. Don't accuse him of acting wickedly. And he has the right to do whatever he wants because he's God. Nobody gave him that authority. It's what he already has. And we're nothing without him. And then Elihu says that, Job, you have multiplied your words against God. Chapter 34, verse 35 through 37, Job speaks without knowledge. His words are without insight. If only Job were tested to the limit, because his answers are like those of wicked men. For he adds rebellion to his sin. He scornfully claps in our presence while multiplying his words against God. That's what Elihu is saying that Job has done. That he's just not talking in the way that he should. He's multiplying his words against God. And he said Job should stop and consider God's wondrous works. Look at chapter 37, verse 14. Listen to this, Job. Stop and consider God's wonders. Verse 23 and 24, you need to stop and consider God's wonders and know that God does not violate justice and abundant righteousness. It says, the Almighty, we cannot reach him. He is exalted in power. He will not violate justice and abundant righteousness. Therefore, men fear him. He does not look favorably on any who are wise in heart. So, Elihu has now spoken. And now, at the conclusion of this, now we see that God speaks to Job. So, at the conclusion of these speeches, God answers Job from a whirlwind. Job chapters 38 through 41. And interestingly, he never addressed what Job and the friends have said directly, or answers why the trials had occurred. He doesn't give them those answers. Rather, God simply demonstrated time after time how insignificant Job was compared to him. Let's get a sample of this in chapter 38, verses 1 through 7. Then the Lord answered Job from the whirlwind. He said, who is this who obscures my counsel with ignorant words? Get ready to answer me like a man. When I question you, you will inform me. Where were you when I established the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who fixed its dimensions? Certainly you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? What supports its foundations? Or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Job, you answer these things, right? If you know so much, you give me these answers. Certainly you know, right? That's the sense that is carried through these chapters. You know, he's been wanting to take God to court and make God answer. And God's got some questions for him that he needs to answer. Questions that are going to put Job in his place. Many examples are given from the wonders of God's creation concerning how God has designed and provided for each one. Surely Job did not and could not do any of these things. God challenged Job to answer and correct him after Job had been arguing that God had afflicted Job unjustly and wanted a hearing with God in court. Again, look there in verse 3. Right? Get ready to answer me like a man. When I question you, you will inform me. And then over in chapter 40, the Lord answered Job, verses 1 and 2, will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Let him who argues with God give an answer. And then verses 6 through 8, it says, then the Lord answered Job from the whirlwind, get ready to answer me like a man. When I question you, you will inform me. Would you really challenge my justice? Would you declare me guilty to justify yourself? He's cutting to Job's arguments here and getting him to think about Job's true position. If Job could not do these marvelous things, then if Job could do these marvelous things, then Job could deliver himself. chapter 40, verses 9 through 14. Do you have an arm like God's? Can you thunder with a voice like his? Adorn yourself with majesty and splendor, and clothe yourself with honor and glory. Pour out your raging anger. Look on every proud person and humiliate him. Look on every proud person and humble him. Trample the wicked where they stand. Hide them together in the dust. Imprison them in the grave. Then I will confess to you that your own right hand can deliver you. Right? If you really can do all these things, then deliver yourself. Particularly, God pointed Job to the examples of Behemoth. Go read the description of Behemoth and the points that God's making concerning this creature that is called Behemoth. Chapter 40, verses 15 through 24. And then Leviathan in chapter 41, verses 1 through 34. Read them as spectacular creatures God had made. We don't know their exact identity, but these creatures existed in the past, and Job was familiar with them. And they're spectacular creatures that God had made, but people cannot conquer. Chapter 40, verse 19, regarding Behemoth, he is the foremost of God's works. Only his maker can draw the sword against him. In chapter 41, concerning Leviathan, verse 10, no one is ferocious enough to rouse Leviathan. Who then can stand against me? Or you can't even take on this creature, let alone the creature's maker. So God speaks to Job, and then we see at the conclusion of this book some restitutions between Job, the friends, and God. Now, Job is recorded as speaking twice after God spoke. One kind of in the middle, very briefly, and then one at the end. In chapter 40, the one that's sort of in the middle, verses 3 through 5, then Job answered the Lord, I am so insignificant. How can I answer you? I place my hand over my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not reply. Twice, but now I can add nothing. In chapter 42, he says in verses 1 through 6, then Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do anything, and no plan of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is this who conceals my counsel with ignorance? Surely I spoke about things I did not understand, things too wondrous for me to know. You said, listen now, and I will speak. When I question you, you will inform me. I had heard reports about you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I reject my words and am sorry for them. I am dust and ashes. Both times that Job spoke acknowledged Job's insignificance and God's greatness. So he repented for speaking of things that were too wondrous for him, calling God into question, though Job still acknowledged God's greatness. But then God also rebuked the three friends, though saying nothing about Elihu. You know, Elihu had spoken with much greater wisdom than the others, and God never seems to condemn what Elihu had said. He puts Job in his place, and then he speaks directly to the three friends. And interestingly, they were told to offer burnt offerings for themselves by bringing them to Job. Kind of an interesting turn of events after all the accusations they have been making against Job and his wickedness. It says in Job 42, verses 7 through 9, after the Lord had finished speaking to Job, he said to Eliphaz the Temanite, I am angry with you and your two friends, for you have not spoken the truth about me, as my servant Job has. Now take 7 bulls and 7 rams, go to my servant Job, and offer a burnt offering for yourselves. Then my servant Job will pray for you. I will surely accept his prayer and not deal with you as your folly deserves. For you have not spoken the truth about me as my servant Job has. And so then we see Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar, they went and did as the Lord had told them, and the Lord accepted Job's prayer. And then what we find when all this was done, God then restored the fortunes of Job, even doubling them, and blessed Job greatly. Chapter 42, verses 10 through 16. After Job had prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes and doubled his previous possessions. All his brothers, sisters, and former acquaintances came to him and dined with him in his house. They sympathized with him and comforted him concerning all the adversity the Lord had brought on him. Each one gave him a piece of silver and a gold earring. So the Lord blessed the last part of Job's life more than the first. He owned 14,000 sheep and goats, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 female donkeys. He also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He named his first daughter Jemimah, his second Kezia, and his third Karen Hapuk. No women as beautiful as Job's daughters could be found in all the land, and their father granted them an inheritance with their brothers. Job lived 140 years after this and saw his children and their children to the 4th generation. Then Job died, old and full of days. So we see in the end the restitutions that had been made and things that everybody had to take care of at the conclusion of the story. And again, God blesses Job. The story of Job reminds us that we do not always know why things happen to us the way they do. However, our wisdom and experiences do not put us in a position to call God into question. Instead, God is always unmatched, and we should never question his commitment to what is good and right. We should simply put our trust in him to work all things out according to his will.